The United Kingdom becoming the first country to slap Russia with new sanctions for the death of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. They're freezing the assets of 6 officials who were in charge of the prison where Navalny died. Tomorrow, the U.S. is preparing to announce a major new Russian sanctions package over the death of Navalny. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the sanctions will target Russia's military manufacturing and its economy. Joining me now is Georgia Congressman Austin Scott. He is a member of the House Armed Services, Intelligence, and Agriculture Committees. Congressman, good morning. Sanctions have not deterred Vladimir Putin yet. Some would argue that it's actually emboldened him to find other routes of revenue on the black market, in particular with oil. So what can the United States do that we haven't already done to deter Putin?
Well, we could enforce the sanctions. And so we know that the Biden administration made a decision not to enforce the sanctions. India has bought a tremendous amount of oil from Russia that has given Russia the cash that they need. They're extremely cash rich right now to rebuild their military industrial complex. And so we have, I believe, a package that will come to the floor over the next several weeks that would provide additional weapons to Ukraine and was going to enforce President Biden to enforce the sanctions that were already in place against Russia. So if Jake Sullivan wants to announce additional sanctions against Russia, that's great. We're all for that. But you know, what the Biden administration needs to answer is why they haven't enforced the current sanctions that have allowed the Russians to grow their economy and rebuild their military industrial complex. This was a decision President Biden made, and it's been detrimental to the war in Ukraine. You're on the Select Committee for Intelligence. You tell me, what does the intelligence tell you about Vladimir Putin and his plans? We know exactly who this guy is. I mean, look, there are reports now. You've got a U.S. citizen that is potentially facing life in prison for what amounts to a couple of dollars given to a Ukrainian aid. When Navalny was moved in December of last year, I think most of us that watched this issue and studied this issue expected that Putin would kill him over the next several weeks. That obviously happened. If we want to win the war in Ukraine, and I do want to win the war in Ukraine, then it's a multifaceted approach. Certainly, we need to give the Ukrainians the weapons they need, but the Biden decision not to enforce the sanctions against Russia and to allow Russia to sell all the oil that they've sold, which has helped their economy grow, and then they've put that money into their military industrial complex, which has given them the weapons they need to fight the war in Ukraine. Remember, Russia just a couple of months ago, needed to go to North Korea to get weapons to fight in Ukraine. They don't have to do that anymore. And it is the end result of Biden allowed the Russians to skirt the sanctions. And so when Jake Sullivan announces the new sanctions, we welcome it. But what Jake Sullivan needs to do is answer the question, why hasn't the Biden administration enforced the current sanctions against Russia? Let me ask you this. The Wall Street Journal writes in the editorial section, it's time to seize Russia's reserves. And they say, look, they're promising tough new sanctions. The White House, the test of seriousness, the Journal says, is whether President Biden is willing to seize Russia's sovereign assets and then transfer them to Ukraine. I think that is something that you will see in a Republican package that comes to the floor of the House of Representatives. I say Republican. I hope it will be very bipartisan. 4 things that we would like to see: additional weapons for Ukraine, the seizure of Russian assets and using those assets to pay for the war in Ukraine, what Russia has done there, the enforcement of the sanctions, the current sanctions or additional sanctions against Russia. And then let's not forget that we need our NATO and treaty partners to not be buying energy from Russia. And so we need to be exporting LNG and energy to our NATO partners and our treaty partners in Europe. So those are the 4 things that I hope you would see in a bipartisan package come to the floor of the House that allows Ukraine not just the weapons they need, but the ability to win by hurting Russia's economy. To be clear, we're talking, I mentioned the reserves, we're talking about $300 billion. $300 billion. Sure. But real quick, so you're planning to bring that to the floor when you get back to D.C.? I hope that we will have a package that comes to the floor that has those 4 aspects in it. Okay. Let me tell you something. Giving the Ukrainians the weapons, I'm all for it. I want you to know that. I'm ready to cast the vote right now to give the Ukrainians the weapons, but giving them the weapons without the sanction enforcement will not do anything other than simply prolong a war.
Okay. Well, Fox News' Brett Baer did interview Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Gosh, I always do that. My apologies. From the front lines of the war with Russia, Zelensky is saying that his country needs more, and they need it now, not later. So watch this.
We have to be more quick. That means to lose all the bureaucracy what we have. Otherwise, we will not have any chance. So to be smart technology, more technologically, and of course, quick. It's not money, it's people's lives.
It's not money, it's people's lives. So the Senate bill providing $60 billion in aid to Ukraine, it's still in limbo in the House. Speaker Johnson wants the president to secure the border first. And so New Jersey Democrat Josh Gottheimer is now circulating this resolution. It promises to protect Speaker Johnson from any possible removal attempts if the speaker puts the foreign aid bill up for a vote. Where do you stand on this?
Look, I support a package for Ukraine that does the four things I said. Let's give them the weapons that they need. Let's make sure the sanctions are enforced against Russia. This decision that Biden made to not enforce the sanctions against Russia, this has been the most detrimental decision, more so than not giving the Ukrainians as many weapons as they need. Make sure that our partners you have access to the energy that they need without being dependent on Russia, and then seizure of the assets. So, what Gottheimer's doing and others are doing, this gamesmanship that they're playing is detrimental to the vote. We have the majority of Republicans, I think, will vote for a package that does the four things I've outlined. We obviously have a very small group in the Republican Party that will not vote for it. The question is, are Josh and the Democrats going to play games with procedural votes and procedural motions when we work to bring it to the floor, or are they going to do the right thing and allow us a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives without the Democrats playing games on the procedure? That's the key issue. They know we don't have the votes in and of ourselves if the Democrats play games on procedure to pass things.
Well, look,
and so just watch them on the procedural votes.
Watch them on the procedural votes. Okay, we will do that. And and I'll end it with this. I mean, going back to the issue of Russia, I'm glad that you said strongly at the beginning of our interview that we need to enforce the sanctions that are already in place. These new sanctions that they plan to announce tomorrow may be meaningless if you're not going to enforce them. Whether it's oil or whether it's the steel market, Russia knows how to get around these sanctions, and they are making more money than ever. And this is how they're doing it, Congressman. Congressman Austin Scott, we're going to be watching for that legislation when you return to D.C. Thank you, sir.